Your phone is face down on the counter. You are halfway through your morning coffee, still in your house slippers, scrolling through nothing in particular. The kids are getting ready for school. Your partner is in the shower. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. And then your phone buzzes. Once, then again, then 3 times in rapid succession. You pick it up. It is not a text. It is not a notification from social media. It is your banking app. And the message on the screen does not make sense at first. You read it again. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. You stare at it. Your account had over $40,000 in it yesterday. You tap the app open and the balance stares back at you. 0. Not low, not overdrawn by a few $100s. 0. You try to transfer money from your savings account. Access restricted. You call the number on the back of your debit card. You wait on hold for 11 minutes. And when the representative finally picks up, they do not apologize. They do not explain. They read a single sentence from what sounds like a prepared script and then tell you they cannot discuss the matter further on this channel and that you will be receiving correspondence by registered mail. The line goes dead. Your coffee is cold. Your kids are asking why you look like that. And you have absolutely no idea what just happened to your money. Welcome back to Canada Property Watch. In previous investigations, we exposed how the CRA's algorithmic reassessment engine is quietly reopening home sale transactions from as far back as 2017. Clawing back principal residence exemptions from families who had no idea they were being watched. We also broke down how the self-supply rule under Canada's Excise Tax Act has been weaponized against new construction landlords who never even knew they owed HST in the first place. Today, we are going deeper into the banking system itself, because what is happening right now to Canadian account holders is not a glitch, it is not a misunderstanding, and it is absolutely not temporary. Banks in this country have quietly acquired new administrative tools and internal authorization frameworks that allow them to freeze, restrict, and effectively eradicate access to personal and business accounts with a speed and a legal completeness that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. And the terrifying part is not just that it is happening. The terrifying part is who it is happening to, why it is happening now, and the permanent damage it leaves behind long after the freeze itself is lifted. Let us start with the mechanics of how a Canadian bank account freeze actually works, because most people have a completely wrong picture of this process in their heads. When most Canadians imagine a bank freezing an account, they picture a dramatic courtroom scene, a judge in a robe, a lawyer making arguments, some formal legal proceeding where the account holder has a chance to speak, to explain, to defend themselves. That picture is wrong. Under Canadian banking law, specifically the provisions embedded in the Bank Act and reinforced by anti-money laundering obligations under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act, a chartered bank in Canada does not need a court order to restrict or freeze an account they have internally flagged as high risk. They need only their own internal compliance determination. Full stop. The bank is both the investigator and the judge. They can freeze first and notify later. And their obligation to explain the specific reason for the freeze to you, the account holder, is legally minimal. They are not required to hand you a file. They are not required to tell you exactly what triggered the flag. They are required to tell you that a restriction has been applied and that you may seek independent legal advice. That is it. That is the complete extent of your rights in the moment your money disappears. Now here is where it becomes catastrophically worse for a very specific category of Canadian. Because there are 2 types of account freezes happening right now in 2026, and they are operating through entirely different legal pipelines, and they are catching entirely different people, and both of them are accelerating simultaneously. The first type is the anti-money laundering freeze. This is the one that has been around the longest. It is triggered when a bank's internal transaction monitoring system detects patterns that match the behavioral profiles embedded in FINTRAC's suspicious transaction reporting guidelines. And here is what those profiles look like in practice. Large cash deposits, particularly anything approaching or exceeding $10,000, even when broken into smaller amounts across multiple days, which is a practice the system specifically flags. frequent transfers between accounts held at different institutions, business accounts receiving regular deposits that do not correspond to the business type registered with the bank, personal accounts receiving wire transfers from foreign jurisdictions without documented business purposes, rental income deposited in cash, and here is the one that is catching hundreds of Canadian landlords and small property investors right now in 2026. A sudden spike in deposits into a personal account that coincides with a period of documented financial stress, including missed mortgage payments, HELOC drawdowns, or credit bureau deterioration. The system interprets that pattern as a distressed liquidation of unreported assets, and when it flags it, the freeze can be instantaneous, automated, and applied across every account you hold at that institution simultaneously. The second type is the mortgage-linked account freeze, and this one is the kill switch that most Canadians have never heard of and absolutely never agreed to in any way they consciously understood. When you signed your mortgage documents, buried inside those documents was a clause, typically under the section governing security interests and related banking relationships, that gave your lender a right of offset and, in many cases, a right to restrict your deposit accounts if they determine your mortgage is in material default or if they determine that you have made material misrepresentations in your original mortgage application. That clause was always there. But until recently, banks almost never used it because the housing market was appreciating. The collateral was solid, and the cost of triggering that clause against a borrower was higher than the benefit. Hence, that calculation has now completely reversed. Collateral values in many Canadian markets have softened or deteriorated. Variable rate mortgage holders who locked in during 2020 and 2021 are now carrying payments that have increased by 40, 50, even 60% compared to their original payment at signing, and the delinquency data is no longer marginal. The number of Canadian mortgage holders who are 90 or more days behind on their payments has been climbing in a pattern that the banks are not publicly discussing in clear language, but that their internal risk models have been screaming about for 18 months. So let us walk through what actually happens when these two systems intersect in a single person's life. Because this is the scenario that is playing out in real Canadian households right now, and that most people do not see coming until the moment it arrives. Picture someone we will call Marcus. Marcus is 41 years old, lives in the Greater Toronto area. He bought his primary residence in 2019 for just under $900,000 with a 20% down payment. He financed a second property in 2021, a semi-detached in Brampton, as a rental using a refinanced HELOC against his primary residence as the down payment source. At the time of that rental property purchase, the rental income was strong enough to support the carrying costs. When Marcus filled out his mortgage application for the Brampton property, the rental income he declared was real, but the documentation he provided to support it was a single-year lease agreement that he had verbally agreed to modify with his tenant, meaning the actual rent being collected was lower than what was documented. It was not a dramatic fraud. It was the kind of small paperwork inflation that was extremely common during the boom years and that almost no lender scrutinized carefully because rising values made everyone comfortable. Fast forward to late 2024. Marcus's variable rate mortgage on the Brampton property has reset to a payment that is $940 per month, higher than what he was originally paying. His tenant, who had been subsidizing the property's carrying costs, moved out. He has been carrying the vacancy for 4 months. He has missed 2 mortgage payments on the Brampton property. He called his bank. Armin explained the situation and was placed in what the bank called a mortgage deferral assessment process, which is a formal internal review. He thought that review was designed to help him find a solution. He did not understand that what it actually triggers is a full audit of his original mortgage file. And that is the moment the entire structure begins to detonate from the inside. The bank's internal audit of Marcus's 2021 mortgage file takes approximately 6 weeks. During that 6 weeks, Marcus is not notified of anything. He continues his normal banking. He makes his payroll deposits from his small business into his business account at the same institution. He pays his household bills. He moves money between accounts the way he always has. And then one morning, his phone buzzes. Not once, 3 times. And every account he holds at that institution, his personal checking, his business operating account, his personal savings, is restricted simultaneously. His balance is accessible for viewing, but not for use. His scheduled pre-authorized payments begin to fail. His business payroll, which was set to process in 48 hours, does not go through. 3 employees call him that day, asking why their direct deposits have not arrived. The legal mechanism the bank has used is the right of offset combined with a material misrepresentation finding in his original mortgage application. The lease documentation he submitted in 2021 did not match the actual rental income collected, and the bank has flagged this as a misrepresentation that voids certain borrower protections that would otherwise require a formal power of sale proceeding. What would normally take months through the courts is now compressed into a sequence of administrative actions the bank is authorized to take unilaterally. The freeze is not a punishment. From the bank's legal perspective, the freeze is a protective measure to preserve assets against a borrower whose file has been internally reclassified as fraudulent. Now ask yourself honestly, would this happen to you? Not in the dramatic sense of a criminal mastermind with fake documents and offshore accounts, but in the ordinary, messy, human sense of someone who stretched the paperwork slightly in 2020 or 2021 because everyone was doing it and the market was going up and no one was looking too carefully. Because that is exactly the profile the banks are now auditing, not the obvious fraudsters. The ordinary, over-leveraged Canadians who made small compromises on small documents during a period of institutional permissiveness that has now been surgically reversed. And here is what makes this particularly merciless. When Marcus's accounts are frozen, the cascade of financial collateral damage is almost immediate and almost impossible to stop. His business payroll fails. His commercial landlord receives a bounced payment. His mortgage on his primary residence, held at a different institution, is not directly affected yet, but the credit bureau impact of the missed payments and the business account irregularities begins to propagate within 30 days. His credit score, which was in the mid-700s, drops by over 100 points in a single reporting cycle. His insurance broker calls because the business liability policy is connected to a pre-authorized payment that has now failed twice. His accountant calls because the corporate tax installment that was scheduled from the frozen business account did not process, and CRA has now sent a notice of missed installment payment, which is a separate problem with a separate escalation timeline. This is what the financial thriller lexicon calls a death spiral. It is not one catastrophic event. It is a sequence of individually survivable problems that arrive simultaneously and that each require money, legal capacity, or creditworthiness to solve, none of which Marcus currently has access to. Now, here is the part that even lawyers and mortgage brokers rarely explain clearly, and it is the reason why getting the freeze lifted is not the end of Marcus's problems, even if he eventually succeeds in doing so. Because in the process of conducting its internal audit, the bank has filed a suspicious transaction report with FINTRAC. That report is not public. Marcus does not know it has been filed. He cannot access it. He cannot challenge it. And the existence of that report in the FINTRAC system creates a flag that other financial institutions can potentially encounter when Marcus attempts to open accounts or apply for credit elsewhere. The report does not expire in any meaningful time frame. It becomes part of a financial record that follows Marcus through the system in ways that are invisible to him but entirely visible to the institutional infrastructure he depends on. And this brings us to the scenario that completely destroys the myth that is still circulating on real estate investing forums and YouTube comment sections across Canada. The myth that says if things get really bad, you just hand the keys back. You walk away from the property, you take the hit on your credit, and you rebuild. That myth is mathematically, legally, and factually dead in 2026. Here is why. When Marcus's Brampton property eventually goes through power of sale, the bank will list and sell it at whatever price the market will bear at that moment. If the sale proceeds are insufficient to cover the outstanding mortgage balance, the legal fees, the default insurance claim, and the carrying costs accumulated during the sale process, Marcus is personally liable for the deficiency. That is a deficiency judgment. It is not dischargeable by walking away. It is a legal debt that attaches to Marcus personally and that the bank can pursue through wage garnishment, seizure of other assets, and liens against any future property he acquires. And because the file has been internally classified as involving misrepresentation, CMHC Mortgage Default Insurance, which is the mechanism that normally provides some backstop to borrowers in distress, has a specific exclusion for files where the original application contained material misrepresentations. Marcus does not get the protection of that insurance backstop. He gets the deficiency judgment and the garnishment with no buffer. This is the permanent prison that no one talks about on the investing podcasts. The property is gone, the equity is gone, but the debt follows Marcus to his next job, his next address, and potentially his next decade of paychecks. There is also a dimension of this that is affecting people who have done absolutely nothing wrong, and it is important to understand because it expands the scope of who should be paying close attention right now. When properties go through accelerated power of sale proceedings and are liquidated at distressed prices to recover bank losses, those sales register in the local comparable sales database. They become the new benchmark for what properties on that street, in that neighborhood, in that postal code are worth. A law-abiding homeowner who has paid every mortgage payment, declared every dollar of rental income, and done everything correctly wakes up one morning to discover that their neighbor's distressed sale has permanently erased $80, $90, and $100,000 from their paper equity. They did not make a single mistake, but the collateral damage from someone else's financial execution has reached across the property line and cannibalized their wealth without their consent and without any legal remedy. This is not hypothetical. This is the mechanism by which concentrated pockets of over-leveraged investment property, particularly in areas like the 905 corridor, parts of Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo, and certain neighborhoods in Calgary and Edmonton, are beginning to create localized price pressure events that look, from the outside, like a gradual market softening, but that are, from the inside, a structured liquidation cascade executing in slow motion. The question you need to sit with right now is a very simple one. How many accounts at Canadian chartered banks are currently sitting inside the same internal risk reclassification pipeline that Marcus's accounts were sitting in before his phone buzzed 3 times on that ordinary morning? The answer, based on the delinquency data that is publicly available and the mortgage renewal stress that is mathematically unavoidable for hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are now rolling off ultra-low pandemic-era rates into current market rates, is that the number is not small. It is not a rounding error. It is a systemic condition that the banks are managing quietly, one file at a time, through administrative tools that most Canadians have never been told they agreed to, and that operate completely outside the court system and completely outside the public record. You are not being dramatic if this concerns you. You are being rational, because the distance between Marcus's situation and the situation of anyone who used a HELOC to fund a down payment, who carried a rental property through vacancy, who stretched documentation during the application process in 2020 or 2021, is not a chasm. It is a single internal risk classification decision made by a system that does not know your name, does not know your circumstances, and does not care about either. If you have accounts at the same institution that holds your mortgage, you need to understand the right of offset clause in your mortgage agreement and what it authorizes. If you are behind on any payment connected to a property, you need to understand that a deferral request does not pause the audit process, it initiates it. And if your original mortgage application contained any documentation that does not perfectly match the actual financial reality it was supposed to represent, you are not in a comfortable position. You are in a position that requires a conversation with a mortgage professional and potentially a lawyer before the bank initiates that conversation for you. Subscribe to Canada Property Watch. Ring the notification bell so you do not miss what we are examining next. Because in our next investigation, we are going inside the CMHC data itself and exposing the specific postal codes where the deficiency judgment pipeline is already operating at industrial scale, where the power of sale listings are beginning to cluster into the kind of density that historically precedes a localized price collapse, and where the next wave of ordinary Canadian homeowners are going to wake up one morning to discover that their net worth has been quietly vaporized by a process they never knew was operating 3 houses down from where they sleep. That investigation drops very soon. You do not want to miss it.